Okay, here we go. Congresswoman Susie Lee, thank you so much for joining us. And my first question is about some endorsements, maybe unexpected, like the Review Journal, Chamber of Commerce, usually going Republican, but they endorsed you. What do you want to say about that?
Well, listen, I am proud to have those endorsements, and I think it's a reflection of the work that I've done in Congress since I've been there for 2 years of really trying to work with both parties across the aisle in a bipartisan manner to get things done that are so important to Nevada families. And I think there's a recognition that I'm putting politics aside and trying to get progress and solve problems. As you know, I joined the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a caucus of 25 Democrats and 25 Republicans when I first came to Congress. And really, that was my commitment to the constituents of Congressional District 3, that they actually want to see a member of Congress who's going to try to outreach and build relationships with members of both parties, because as we know, this is such a polarized time in this country. And what I hear from my constituents is they just want to see that we're actually getting together, having those tough conversations, because everything isn't black and white. And a lot of these issues do require a lot of back and forth and compromise in policy discussions. And so you need to have someone who's committed to doing that. And I think that that was both of those endorsements are a recognition that that's the type of leadership I bring to this seat.
You mentioned the Problem Solvers Caucus. What would you say is your biggest bipartisan achievement?
Well, listen, I mean, we've passed, I think the biggest thing that the Problem Solvers Caucus has done was our Break the Gridlock package, which really was to address some of the rules that have prevented things from coming to the floor of the House. So for instance, we got a rule passed that if you get a co-sponsorship of 290 members of Congress, it has to be bipartisan at that point, that it has to come to the floor of the House for a vote. And, you know, you think about it, there have been many pieces of legislation that have had wide support across this country that have been prevented from even getting their time in Congress by the leadership. And so that's a big accomplishment of this. And then probably the biggest thing is, as you know, the Democrats in the House, we passed the HEROES Act over 5 months ago. It had been sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. There was really no movement about it. It was a stalemate. About a month ago, we came together, the Problem Solvers Caucus, really, it was just all of us rank and file members, and said, how can we get these negotiations moving again? Because as you know, especially here in Southern Nevada, we have so many families that are struggling, that are worried about paying rent, putting food on their table. And so we got together and put together our own package of guidelines. And it was instrumental in restarting the negotiations that are happening right now. So even the president even tweeted out a couple days ago that it's the Problem Solvers package that he's looking at as a compromise. So I think it's, you know, really taking us having that tough conversation, us looking at all the different issues and trying to find out what is it that we can get past, like what is it we can get done? Because ultimately we have to get a third stimulus package passed, and it cannot wait until after the election. And so we've been instrumental in forcing and pushing and cajoling our leadership to get this package passed.
And since it is stalled, should it be passed piece by piece then?
Listen, I'm a proponent of looking at comprehensive, because how are we going to make those trade-offs that, you know, we want the aviation industry to succeed and not go under, but also here in Nevada, we have so many small business owners, restaurant owners, our live entertainment, you know, and so to me, I think it's all a comprehensive package. We have to look at, you know, extending unemployment benefits, look at testing and tracing. And so I'd like to see it come together as a comprehensive package.
If it just can't come together as a comprehensive package, though, could you maybe list, I know you said everything is important, but could you maybe list top 3 priorities in your opinion?
The biggest priority for me is obviously state and local funding. We have seen in Nevada about a quarter of our state budget has a hole in it because of this pandemic. And basically, we have already given state and local funding, but a lot of it was dedicated towards expenses that were related to COVID-19. And so looking at assistance to states that will help them when they've seen a reduction of revenue, as we're seeing here in Southern Nevada. And I believe, listen, we're not going to get past the economic fallout of this virus until we get past the public health crisis. So I believe that the $75 billion or additional funding, not just funding for a testing and tracing strategy, but also a strategy, and making sure it's one that we can move to allow our schools to open, allow our bigger convention spaces to open, et cetera. If we had rapid testing, if we were able to concentrate that testing in a way that, and I know that there's several businesses here who are taking it upon themselves, but just think about how incredibly powerful that would be if the federal government could take a leadership in that. And then, the extension of the PPP program, that's been incredibly important to our state. We've had over close to 45,000 businesses use those resources, over 500,000 jobs. The list goes on. Unemployment, extended unemployment benefits, another stimulus check. I just feel that we had done such incredible bipartisan work with the Families First Act and then the CARES bill. And now it's really when, we are seeing people that are on the precipice, and we need to get that additional aid there. Housing and rental assistance as well is so important too.
You have a background in education. What is the solution in the middle of a pandemic? Should students be back in the classroom?
Well, first of all, I think that's our ultimate goal. We know that distance learning is not the preferred outcome here. We want to get students back in the classroom safely. I think, again, to me, this all comes back with, what are we doing to stop the community spread? What are we doing to make sure that we're getting the incidence of COVID-19 down in our community? Protecting, again, we know that students or young kids can be carriers, they might not get as sick, but then they go home to families where family members might have a comorbidity or another pre-existing conditions, or teachers may have it. And so to me, it's really measuring what we're doing to stop the community spread, but also how we can keep people safe. And ultimately, it comes to funding. When you think about it, if we could, even if we did a hybrid model where kids went for 2 days on, 2 days out, that's increased transportation, it's increased staffing, all of that takes additional funding, additional PPE, even if you were to do additional testing, which I think is so important. Where we have seen schools that have opened and have been relatively successful, they've been able to identify a spread before it got out of hand and isolate it. And that's going to be really important. But again, all of that requires funding. And that's why the state and local funding is so incredibly important as a part of the Heroes 2.0 Act.
Anything you'd like to add about that additional challenge for parents of students with special needs with the distance learning?
Yeah, I listen, we have seen our most vulnerable students have been falling further and further behind, whether it is students who are living in poverty, who didn't have access to either internet or the devices, but also our special needs, because they require that additional touch point, they require the additional resources, and how are we delivering that, online is important. That's been an important issue that I've been an advocate for. I introduced a bill, Protect Our Students Act, which is basically Keep Our PACT Act, which is basically to fully fund IDEA and Title I. Traditionally, the federal government has never given those exact resources to our state. It would mean about $400 million a year for our state funding if we as a federal government fully funded those resources. And so again, to me, a lot of this comes down to making sure we're continuing to fight for the necessary resources we need. But also, we all have to work together to stop the spread of this virus. And we know that the economic fallout, our fallout for our families who are, having to teach their students at home, we can beat this. And literally, we have the resources at our fingertip. It's called a mask. And if people would simply just wear that and social distance, not be in large groups. But to me, it's so important, especially for our special ed students, to get back into the classroom.
Joe Biden finally said he is not a fan of court packing. What are your thoughts?
Listen, my thoughts are, right now we are faced with the most major crisis, at least in my lifetime, in this country, this pandemic. Families are on the brink of collapse. Businesses are on the brink of bankruptcy. And this administration is choosing to rush through Supreme Court hearings at this point, looking at basically being able to place a justice on the court just in time for the Supreme Court hearing on the Affordable Care Act, which would take away protections for pre-existing conditions from millions of Americans. So I find it that right now, as I've said before, I am a one-issue Congresswoman at this point. I think the biggest issue facing Congress right now is making sure we get another package past the finish line, onto the president's desk, and signed.
Moving on to Dan Rodheimer. One of his attack ads claims that you are Nancy Pelosi's puppet. What do you want to say about that?
Dan Rodheimer is taking a book out of the Republican Party playbook. And basically, I think that my endorsements speak for themselves. The Review Journal, the Chamber of Commerce. I've been ranked by the Lugar Center, which ranks members based on their bipartisanship as one of the most bipartisan members of Congress. And so I think it's a false attack, but it's basically one that is being played all across this country by Republicans who are going after seats held by Democrats. And, but then you have to look at what Rodheimer's record is. And basically he's running on a record of basically being pro-Trump, and he's holding on to those coattails. And so I think it's an interesting attack.
Your campaign has really focused on his history. He points out that he's never been convicted of a crime.
Listen, I think he has a well-documented long history of violence and fraud. And I felt that it was important for the voters of Congressional District 3 to know that. Whether it was the Waffle House, he was basically ordered to attend an anger management class in response to that attack. Multiple phone calls, not just from his house here, but also separate incidents down in Florida of domestic violence. And so I think people need to understand the type of violence that has been a pattern for Dan Rodheimer.
Voters have been inundated with the mailers, the commercials, the attack ads. How concerned are you that this will be a tight race or that he will win?
Listen, this is this seat was drawn to be a traditionally swing district. It will be, it has always been a tight race in the seat. What I'm concerned about is I believe that people want to have a Congress member who has demonstrated, not just by what they've done here in our community, but has demonstrated, I have the experience of showing that I've been able to roll up my sleeves and work with people of the other party. I think that the divisiveness and the dysfunction in this country is so distressing, especially right now where people are on the brink with respect to the economy, wanting people to work together. This Dan Rodheimer, his slogan is, "I'm going to take a chair to the back of Washington." He says that in one breath and then turns around in the next and says, "But I'm going to work together." I don't know about you, but traditionally when I try to work with people, I actually speak to them with respect instead of threatening them. I believe that voters are going to look at my 25-year track record in our community. From day one when I moved here, I have gotten after the issues that are facing us, whether it is homelessness. I started the city's first comprehensive homeless center. When the school district cut after school programs, I started the inner city games, which is now the after school all-stars. And then when we had our dropout problem, I rolled up my sleeves, took over the helm of communities and schools, which today is now the state's largest and most effective dropout prevention program. So I believe that voters are going to look at that track record. They're going to look at my track record in DC, and they're going to understand that I'm the type of leadership that we need more of in Washington. Juxtapose that to Dan Rodheimer, who is basically clinging to the coattails of this president. I haven't really heard a plan of what he has for the future. It's one thing to say you don't like something, but it's another thing to get to work and try to fix it. And I've demonstrated I have a track record of being able to do that.
Donald Trump did win CD3 by 1 point in 2016. What about that concern? And have voters noticed enough of a change to vote Democrat?
Listen, Donald Trump won it by a point. I was able to carry this district by 9 points in 2018. To me, this race is not about Donald Trump. This race, to me, is about the people of Southern Nevada. We are ground zero for the economic devastation of this pandemic. We have a large and vibrant community. We have a large community of retirees who are worried about Medicare and Social Security. We have, parents who are are teaching their children online at home. And I believe that it will be a referendum of not only who is going to help us rebuild. And, my background in our community of taking on the toughest problems, I believe that I'm a member of the Education and Labor Committee. We have a long path to get out of this economic crisis, but a lot of it will obviously go through workforce development, making sure that we're bringing funds into our community to support retraining or training our workforce. And I've already have a track record of doing that. Nevada State College just announced a $2 million grant that I would help them secure to help with their education training programs, especially important because it's a Hispanic serving institution. And then I also was able to get $1 million for area health education centers. Again, another key workforce development program of making sure we're training people for jobs of tomorrow. And so to me, I believe that this race is about someone who's willing to get out there, figure out how we're getting resources into our state to help us rebuild, instead of someone who's going to repeat the divisive and violent rhetoric that we have heard for the past 4 years. I think people are really tired of the fear of the violence that we've seen, and they want to see someone who's actually going to work together. And that's the key difference in this race between myself and Dan Rodheimer.
There were several debates on the table, but you did not agree to one for now. Why not?
Listen, Dan Rodheimer had agreed to a PBS debate. I agreed to it as well. And then he backed out basically. And so, it's on to him. I agreed to a debate he had agreed to.
We offered a debate though.
Huh?
We also.
Yes. And I had said because of basically his health practices of having rallies and events with no mask, that I was willing to do one debate. I accepted the one debate that he had accepted, and then he turned it down.
We've asked you about this before. I'm going to ask you again for viewers who may not have seen those previous interviews. There was controversy about your role with PPP loans and your husband's or your family's business. What do you want to say about that? What happened?
Well, listen, I think everyone remembers back in March when we passed the CARES Act, the PPP program. One of the key things, it was really an administration issue that had prevented gaming companies that derive some of their revenues from gaming. They were prevented from accessing the key small business program that was part of the CARES Act, simply because they had gaming revenues. I, along with our entire bipartisan delegation, not just here in Nevada, across the country, many states who have a large gaming presence, we lobbied to make sure that gaming was included in the PPP program. Now, I want to say, prior to that fix, Nevada ranked almost near the bottom in terms of the percentage of small businesses that benefited from the PPP program. Now we have seen close to 45,000 businesses responsible for 500,000 jobs have access to those critical funds. I was doing my job by advocating to make sure that gaming was included in this program, along with our entire delegation. My husband's company applied for it. I had no decision in them applying. I had no role in SBA's decision of approving the loan, and I certainly won't have any role in the repayment of the loan. They claim that those funds went to support about 700 jobs. That's exactly what the program was intended to do, to support employment. And it was so important for our state. And it was egregious that gaming was cut out of that program. And I just did my job by advocating for that.
How concerned are you, though, that voters may have heard about this or hear about this and think, well, maybe there is a conflict of interest and maybe she's just another politician who's out for themselves? How concerned are you about that? And what would you say to them?
I'd say that this was an omission of the key industry in our state. And at a time when, to protect the lives of our fellow Nevadans, of Americans, we asked major businesses to completely shut down, and gaming was one of them. And it was my duty to make that fight, to make sure that our main industry, our main economy driver was covered by this key program. But ultimately, I think people need to look at my track record. 25 years in this community. I say, look at what they have done and which will give you a good idea of what they're about and what they're going to do. And, from the minute I got here, I got to work on key issues facing our most vulnerable residents, whether it was our homeless community, our school children, our kids who are at risk of dropping out. And so, I've demonstrated in my career that I've been able to get results and roll up my sleeves and focus on the issues that affect Nevadans. And I think that's what people are going to be thinking about, especially now as we're looking for who are we going to have on our side that's going to look past the political rhetoric and dig in and get to what we actually need to do to rebuild our economy. And I think the choice is clear.
Congresswoman Susie Lee, thank you so much.
All right, thanks. Good talking to you. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.